Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into OTRAM's YouTube channel. Today we're doing rear wheel bearing on a 2016 Subaru Outback, which is not the car behind me because I got home and realized that I totally forgot to record this intro before going home and while I still had the car. This was by far the worst Subaru rear wheel bearing I've had to do. This took some major beating and banging to get out, as you will see in the video. So stay tuned and we'll get to it. So first thing we're gonna do under here is unplug the electric parking brake because I don't want to break that plug off. And it feels like it's gonna be sticky. So I'm just gonna grab a pick and stick it under there to lift that tab up. There we go. And then we can get to our two caliper stand bolts because we got to pull the caliper off so we can get the rotor off. I'm going to use a long box wrench to loosen the bottom one because this control arm gets in the way of using a ratchet. So I'll get that guy loose. And then I'm going to use my ratchet on the upper one because I've got the room. And you want to loosen both first before you remove them because if you don't, the caliper will want to spin instead of the bolts coming loose. And luckily, these are coming out pretty easily. And then I'm going to wiggle my whole caliper assembly off. If you were changing the brakes, you'd need to actually go through the caliper release procedure to back the backing plate off enough, but luckily we're just doing a wheel bearing, so we don't have to. And there you can hear how bad that wheel bearing is. And then let me bring you around to the other side, and we'll do the rotor. And I don't know how well you guys can see it, but there's a wire going to the top of the knuckle with a 10mm bolt. That's your ABS sensor. I'm going to try to pop this out. I don't absolutely know that you need to take it out, but we're going to do a lot of beating and banging on here, most likely, to get the wheel bearing out. And I'd like to save this sensor from that. So I'm going to try to be nice and get that out of there. Ah, there we go, sweet. And I don't know if you guys can see that, but there's our sensor. And this one actually popped out real easy. A lot of times they're stuck. But while I'm beating the wheel bearing, I don't want to break the tip of this sensor off. So we're going to just tuck that back out of the way. And then our rotor. Oh, there we go. Actually, it wiggled right off. If it hadn't wiggled off, we could have just put 8mm bolts in these two threaded holes and used those to push the rotor off. And then you'll see on the axle nut, it's got a dent to lock it against the shaft. So we're going to stick a chisel in there. And work that back out to unlock it. And that's a 32mm socket. Now Stubby doesn't want to get the job done, so we'll just go up to the big one. There we go. And then I'll just push on there to make sure my axle shaft slides free. And then we've got four 14mm bolts holding the actual wheel bearing on. And once those are out, we're ready to pull the actual wheel bearing. So the super fun part on these is these are always just insanely tight in here. And I have fought with, regular hammer, air hammer, you name it, trying to bust these loose with no luck. And then I bought this wheel bearing buster off Amazon, and it was like, I want to say less than 50 bucks, and totally saved the day on one of these several times ago. Like, these would take hours to do. And then I got this thing, and just so much easier. So I'm gonna tighten that up. I'm gonna lower the car down so I can get a better swing, and I'll move the camera, and I'll come back when we actually break this off. And now the fun part, we're gonna get our big sledgehammer and wail on this till it comes loose. And the amount of beating it's gonna likely take is why we took the sensor out. I wouldn't even try doing a Subaru wheel bearing without one of these. And I don't know what the deal is with these getting stuck in there, but oops. Whew. That has not even budged yet. I doubt it'll do much, but we'll spray some penetrating oil in there. In the past, I've used an air hammer from the back, beat these with a hammer, all with no luck. This is the only thing I've ever had break them loose. And man, even it doesn't want to do it today. So I've moved to 2 fresh studs, because I don't know if you can see it, but these 2 are now bent. And I added thicker washers under the lug nuts to try to take up some of the beating force that's pulling them through. And I also should note, I've got 5 new lug nuts for this, because you don't want to reuse these after you've used them to put this much force on it. So let's see if we can get this to move. And it is not even budging. I'm really hoping I don't pull the flange out of the wheel bearing before we get this loose. This is just nuts. Yep. Well, that is exactly what we did not want to happen. The whole outer wheel hub came out, and now we don't have anything to beat upon. So this will be fun. So I'm going to put the old axle nut back on here temporarily. And I'm going to try whaling directly on this inner bearing housing to see if I can pop this loose. But I want this on here in case I slip so that I don't hit the threads. And that is just nuts. And yeah, I'm gonna have to straighten that out now. So I ended up taking the whole knuckle off. I thought I had filmed it, but I did not press record. So you guys don't have footage of the knuckle removal, but I mean, it's basically you just unbolt all the control arms and it comes off. I have already mangled the backing plate, so I sent Cody to Fairfax to get me another backing plate. And so I cut the existing backing plate to give me clearance to put a hub grappler on there to see if I can maybe pull it this way, because I have beat, whaled, pried, air hammered, and it just doesn't want to budge. So we're going to try and do it this way and see what happens. start to move, or did something pop loose? You are starting to move. Whew! There we go. Hopefully, you don't have to use a hub grappler, cut the backing plate, and do all that to get that loose. But yeah, so I'm gonna I'm gonna take a wire brush and clean up this bore, put this knuckle back on, and then I'll bring you back to the actual wheel bearing repair. Okay, so now we're back where we should have been if we had just pulled the wheel bearing. And I sent Cody to Fairfax. He got me a new backing plate. So now, oh, and I took advantage of having this knuckle off and media blasted the inside bore, got all the corrosion out, and then I put a coating of anti-seize in that bore, so hopefully this one doesn't get stuck in case it ever has to get changed again. Then we're gonna put this on here, and we're gonna line that up. Hope that stays. And then I have put a little bit of red Loctite on each of my bolts. And I'm gonna just loosely tighten those. You wanna be real careful not to cross thread these into your new wheel bearing, because then you need another new wheel bearing. And sometimes you just kind of got to wiggle the wheel bearing around a little bit to get them started. And then I'm going to use an electric impact to zip those in, and you want to do them crisscross so they draw in straight. And then these torque to 48 foot-pounds. And again, I'm gonna... And it's right about here that I learned what the red light on my microphone meant. It meant that the battery was failing, and I lost audio. But here I am just crisscrossing the mounting bolts for the hub. You want to crisscross them as you're torquing them and go around a couple of times to make sure that everything draws in squarely and gets torqued up evenly. And I'm just making sure that nothing's pinched, everything's going to route okay. And clipping some of the wiring back in. And I'm just tightening up. When I took the hub loose, or the knuckle loose, I had to remove some cable routing brackets. So I'm putting the parking brake electrical wire bracket back on. If you're doing the wheel bearing and you don't end up having to take the whole knuckle off, you won't need to do this step. And sorry for the awkwardness of the missing audio here. And I'm just snugging all these brackets down. There's no real reason to torque them. And now I'm going to fish the ABS sensor back through the hole in the top. Now that we've got the axle into the hub, there's no chance of accidentally smashing it. And also just going to snug it up. There's no real reason to torque this one. And now we've got a new axle nut. You want to use a new one because you've ruined the stake when you took the old one off. And a lot of times the stake mark will end up being pretty close to the same spot, and it's really hard to accurately stake it. And you do not want this nut coming loose because that's what sets the preload on the rear bearings and holds them together. So it's also critically important that you torque this nut properly. So I'm going to put the brake rotor and the brake caliper on so I've got something to hold against when I actually torque that nut. And I should mention that I cleaned the brake rotor front and back before I put it back on to make sure I didn't get any fingerprints on it. And we're going to slide the brake caliper back on. And in jostling everything around, the pads had moved on this, so it took a bit to get the pads situated back to where they would slip over the rotor. In some instances, you may have to actually retract the parking brake with a scan tool to get this back on. But since we didn't change the pads or anything, it just took some finagling to get this slipped back on. And then I put some red Loctite on the caliper stand bolts. And we're going to start those, being very careful not to cross thread them. We fix so many caliper mounting threads from being cross threaded. And then a lot of times the cross threads will hold when you're putting them together, but then the next guy that takes it apart, all the threads come out with it, which is never a fun feeling. And then these caliper bolts torque to 49 foot-pounds. And, same as the other ones, I'm going to hit them multiple times going back and forth between the two just to make sure everything's tight, because you don't want the caliper falling off. And then one of the little dust caps for the piston slides fell out when I was wailing on everything, so that's what I was popping back in there. And then I'm going to plug the parking brake electrical wire back in. And I'm going to make sure everything spins freely. We've had issues lately where backing plates and rotors don't play nicely together. Usually it's a rusty backing plate and a new rotor, and the clearances are tight enough that they rub. In this case, we didn't have any problems. I'm going to put a pin in the rotor, like in the vent holes, to counter while I torque that axle nut. And this axle nut torques to 177 foot-pounds. And again, torque is critical on this. And then I'll don't forget to take the pin you used to lock back out. And then I'm going to find the notch in the end of the axle shaft, and I'm going to stake the new nut in to make sure that it can't back off. And I really need to resharpen that caping chisel to make that easier. And then, one final spin to make sure everything's happy. And this is me saying, hey, thanks for tuning in. Hope you found this useful. And if you did, please like and subscribe, because liking and subscribing is what makes the channel grow, and it is very much appreciated. And I will catch you guys on the next one. Thank you again.